A new Daily Show host deals with Iran and religious freedom all dominated this week. This is the Weekend Readout. Hey everybody, I'm Drexel and welcome to this weekend's The Weekend Readout, the show that recaps important stories in politics, pop culture, and pretty much anything else we've been paying attention to from this week. So, let's read it out. Comedy Central announced this week that newcomer comedian Trevor Noah would be taking over the chair from Jon Stewart later this year. Noah literally started his stint as a correspondent maybe 3 or 4 episodes ago, so he's fairly new to the American television audiences, but as usual, we get things pretty late over here. Trevor Noah comes to us with a huge international following. The South African hosted several shows within his country, became a household name in the stand-up comedy circuit, became the first South African stand-up comedian on The Tonight Show, and the man speaks 6 languages. He's not stupid, but here's what was stupid. After he was announced, the backlash he received from tweets he made over the course of his career. Here are just a few of them. Noah tweets, "Almost bumped a Jewish kid crossing the road. He didn't look before crossing, but I still would have felt so bad in my German car." And he also tweets in 2011, "Oh yeah, the weekend, people are gonna get drunk and think that I'm sexy. Quote, fat chicks everywhere." Now, on any regular day, this is a normal feed for a feed of a comedian. Trevor Noah was called everything in the book from sexist and misogynist to racist. It was a little bit bizarre. Now, I understand where people may get this idea just based on their initial read of these tweets, but that's my problem with our generation sometimes. Our inability to think before we react. Noah is a comedian, plain and simple. The threshold for comedians should be pretty high when it comes to what's offensive. We know things are going to be offensive, so why do we let people try to make something out of nothing? These tweets happened about 4 or 5 years ago, and Trevor acknowledged that by tweeting this week, "To reduce my views to a handful of jokes that didn't land is not a true reflection of my character nor my evolution as a comedian." I heard way worse things this week during the Justin Bieber roast. Funny, but way worse. Now, why is this any different for Noah? Is it because our love for Jon Stewart is so great that no one can live up? Is this just a little bit of a hazing period? For their part, Comedy Central stood by their new host, saying, "Trevor Noah pushes boundaries. He is provocative and spares no one, himself included. To judge him or his comedy based on a handful of jokes is unfair. Trevor is a talented comedian with a bright future at Comedy Central." But here's what I want to know. Why did the PR team over at Comedy Central, why did they do a scrub of Noah's social media before he was announced? We live in an age where everything is borderline offensive anyway, and if you're going to introduce a new host that no one knows and certainly doesn't trust yet, the least you can do is help a brother out and keep him from looking crazy. I just hope he's a little bit better than Larry What's-His-Name over at The Nightly Show. Bomb, 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 bomb Iran was the foreign policy mantra a few years ago from GOP presidential nominee John McCain. Tuesday this week, the Iranian nuclear deal talks were set to conclude with hopes of an agreement. Now, just to give you a little bit of a background, Iran's government has been a thorn in the side of the world for years. They are the North Korea of the Middle East. Currently, they are in possession of stockpiles of ingredients that most everyone is sure they are going to use to create a nuclear arsenal that has the potential to be hugely dangerous. Now, the Ayatollah, which is Iran's ruling leadership, and past presidents have used the threat of nuclear weapons to say they're going to wipe out nations they deem as threats, more specifically Israel. Over the years, the U.S. and the other 4 permanent powers and other United Nations have peppered them with sanctions that have had a crippling effect on Iran's economy, but not their rhetoric. There is definitely no shortage of pride within that country. The economic effects have started to hit home, and the U.S., UK, Germany, Russia, China, and France have all been working over the past few months to strike a deal that would keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Thanks to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, all the permanent 5 powers are considered nuclear weapon states, and they all possess pretty large arsenal of nuclear weapons. But none of these countries are going around talking about wiping whole populations off the map. Now, these particular talks were focused on a few key areas: halting and reducing Iran's uranium stockpile and enrichment program, cutting off the country's plutonium production, allowing inspectors to inspect nuclear sites regularly, and the duration in which the agreement will last. Now, I'm pretty convinced that the powers are all hoping that the Ayatollah will eventually die out, and in a decade won't even have to revisit this. In return for these points, the powers are offering to lift significant sanctions, which is a pretty good deal, all things considering. A deal was reached this week, or a framework of a deal was reached that was workable for all the parties. The deal eventually, Iran has agreed to not build any new facilities for the purpose of enriching uranium for 15 years. Iran's breakout timeline, the timeline that it would take for Iran to acquire enough fissile material for one weapon, is currently assessed to be 2 or 3 months. That timeline will be extended to at least 1 year for a duration of at least 10 years under the current framework. Iran will convert its facility at Fordow so that it no longer is used to enrich uranium, and the IAEA will have regular access to all of Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, what I love about all this is that this is diplomacy in action. What critics of the presidents loathe more than the president is the word and the idea of diplomacy. They would much rather bomb Iran, an actual sovereign nation, than try to strike a deal that could avert another world war and cost thousands more American lives. If there's one thing we've learned about this president, though, he doesn't do much bluffing. Through all the talks, the president this week the president has stated that the U.S. will walk away from the table and sanctions will stay in place if Iran proves they can't follow the deal. From a political standpoint, this is good news for the White House. They can claim they tried a diplomatic route, avoiding starting any war with Iran, and stuck to what the American people expect from the nation's top representatives. The Republicans will claim they were right all along about Iran, but something tells me the American people aren't going to forget the 47 Republican senators who sought to undermine even the idea of keeping us out from another war. Speaking of war, there's a war happening here in America, and it's not pretty. It's a constitutional war, a war against people who believe their religious rights are being trampled on, or versus everybody else. Over the past couple of weeks, some states have been introducing, and in the case of Indiana and Arkansas, enacting legislation that supporters say protect religious freedom. But what does that really mean? What is religious freedom? I asked that in a blog last week, and I have yet to get a straight answer. From what it sounds like, this means that religions get the freedom to do whatever they want, while non-believers kind of have to deal with whatever comes their way. Through conversations in the past and throughout this week, I've always argued that Christians and Catholics in this country believe that their religion is far superior to that of other religions in the country and around the world, even though there are more followers of other faiths. They believe that the First Amendment only protects the Christian faith, and thus laws should be made to protect their strong-held beliefs. But what do they need protection from? Governor Mike Pence couldn't answer that and more on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas had to send that state's legislation back to be reworded. What do these supporters get out of all these laws? Well, on one hand, they get the opportunity to decide a handful of really helpful things, mostly like wearing religious garments and using things that would enhance their practice. But that's not what these laws were designed to do. The slate of people standing behind Governor Pence in that photo during last week's private ceremony have been staunchly anti-LGBT, and the money that they get for their campaigns is coming from organizations like the Family Research Council, who believe that LGBT members should go through some sort of conversion therapy. Like the 50s and 60s, they believe that businesses have the right to decide who they should and should not have to serve. Now, I'm all for private businesses making decisions on their own about their patronage. Personally, I welcome it because it separates the grown-ups from the children and it shows people for who they really are and what they stand for. And frankly, these bills are about as un-American as they come. The price of that, however, is the large amount of backlash from businesses, states, cities, politicians, and even notable sports organizations that will hit these supporters with the same vitriol. As we always say, if you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen. The thing is, though, these legislatures introducing these bills and the governors signing them aren't thinking about the effects that these have on you and your state. They have no concept of separating the personal from their duty to have their state's best interests at heart. Now, some might say, but this is in the state's best moral interest, to which I say there won't be an interest in the state if they don't have the economic support they've received for so long, and it won't be long before the federal government starts to cut off aid for programs that are aimed at helping reduce some of that burden. Then who are the supporters supposed to turn to? There is a reason for a separation of church and state. It clouds the judgment, and it keeps representatives from making decisions that keep their states healthy. Governor Hutchinson this week said, "This is a bill that in ordinary times would not be controversial, but these are not ordinary times." And he had one thing right: these are not ordinary times. These are the times where our nation should be leading the world in all areas, especially human rights, yet we've been reduced to constantly arguing about two amendments to the Constitution in which some people feel the government regulates too much. Now, if history tells us anything, it's that religion and guns do most of the world's killing. Maybe we should start reevaluating the morality behind that. Now, every week I've got a lot of things that I think you should have been paying attention to, and I can't always get to them. So here's this week's Not to Mention. Senators Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin are duking it out for the top leadership spots in the Senate now that Harry Reid's retiring. Illinois Representative and retired Lieutenant Colonel Tammy Duckworth announced that she's going to be running for Senate. Senator Robert Menendez was indicted on federal corruption charges. Governor Jerry Brown here in the state of California has issued a severe drought warning. NBC announced that The Wiz would be their next live television event. AMC announced the anticipated Walking Dead spinoff, Fear the Walking Dead. And Furious 7 is on track to be one of the highest grossing box office films ever for an opening weekend. Remember, you can check all of these stories below in the comment section. Now, the U.S. Constitution has been through it this week, particularly the First Amendment. From Trevor Noah's right to free speech to the religious rights freedom of religion, these are areas that will be a constant battle for our nation unless we come to a better understanding of the people who we share the world with. We may disagree on a lot of things, but we all fundamentally believe in life, liberty, and happiness. We need to really start thinking before we speak, act, like, or tweet. Speaking of which, don't forget to like the Facebook page, facebook.com/theweekendreadout, and check out my blog, thereadout365.com, and I'll see you next week. Did you like that episode? Make sure to share with your friends, family, neighbors, all across social media. Don't forget to subscribe and join me here every Saturday right here on The Weekend Readout.